This is the first meeting of the year, and the first item will be appointment of chair. Please could I have nominations for the appointment of chair, please? Councillor Hampton.
Can I nominate Councillor Maxton, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you. That's been moved and seconded. Any other nominations? In that case, could I move to the vote, please? All those members voting in favour, please. Thank you. That's by a majority. That is passed. Thank you. So I'll pass it over to you, Chair.
Right, okay, so I'll do the next bit. Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much, everybody. So now we have the election of Vice Chair. So can I take nominations for that, please?
I'll propose Councillor Hampton.
Okay.
Second, please.
Okay, so Councillor Hampton, are there any other nominations? Okay, all those in favour? Okay, that's
Passed by
carried.
majority.
Thank you.
So, Chair, apologies.
Apologies.
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Osborne.
Fine, okay, thank you. And I think that Councillor Padder is on the way. So, moving on then, are there any declarations of interest, please? No? Good. And then we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March. That was online, wasn't it? Can we agree these as the correct record, please? Yeah? Yeah, people are nodding, so I'll take that as agreement. Thank you. And now we move on to item 4, which is the Article 4 direction to remove permitted development rights for the conversion of offices to residential accommodation. So I think we have on this, is it Sarah? Is it you or Judith? I get confused.
It was actually Joy Brown who wrote both these reports, in fact, but she's not able to make the meeting today. So, yes, I'm going to introduce the report on the Article 4 direction, just to provide you with an update on the introduction of Article 4 direction, and to note the fact that it is currently delayed, and it just explains some of the reasoning behind that, why that's happened. The report itself gives quite a lot of background information about various reports that have been taken to SD panel and Cabinet over the last year at least. Last July, Cabinet agreed to the introduction of Article 4 direction to remove permitted development rights for conversion of offices to residential within the city centre, and that was as a basis for subsequent consultation. We did note at the time that there was an element of risk and uncertainty around this because around the introduction of this because of proposed changes to the government's approach. But we did notify the Department of Levelling Up. I think it wasn't called that at the time, but we'll just call it that for now, at the time about this, because they have powers of intervention. So subsequently we had a consultation period, a report was brought back to SD panel in November, and then subsequently went to Cabinet in December. And subsequent to that meeting, the Article 4 direction was confirmed in December, and it was due to be introduced at the end of July. This is a non-immediate Article 4 direction, which requires a need for 12 months' notice to avoid compensation claims. So, and we didn't hear anything from the Department of Levelling Up at all until May this year, as it says in paragraph 4. So that was very late in the day, and they stated they reviewed the Article 4 direction. I think they're generally happy with the case for protection of office floor space, but they're concerned that it's not applied. It should apply to the smallest geographical area possible. So they feel that the evidence is helpful in providing the strategic context, but they consider that we failed to take a sufficiently targeted approach to the Article 4 direction. So they offered to meet with us to discuss how we could revise the Article 4 direction, and we've actually got a meeting set up for next Tuesday, the 21st of June, with representatives from the Department of Levelling Up, and we want to explore with them how we can best approach the next stage. So taking a more targeted approach to the Article 4 direction within the city centre. So we're just going to explore those issues, but it doesn't seem like they're against it in principle. It's more the targeted nature of it. So we're proposing to take a more granular assessment of the city centre office floor space and then to proceed on that basis. So hopefully it will delay the Article 4 direction, obviously, but by liaising more closely with DHLUC, and we have tried to liaise with them in the past, obviously, we hope that the risk of failure in the future will be reduced. So we will bring any subsequent approach back to SD panel before we go back to Cabinet. And we'll have a much better idea, I think, next week when we've had that meeting as to how that's going to look and the timescales involved as well. So I just noted at paragraph 7 there will be an impact on the Greater Norwich local plan because it was showing the broader city centre area, but we hope that we're addressing that with the officers and we'll update the inspectors when we have a revised area for the Article 4 direction. So this is just really a report for information, and if you've got any questions or comments, I'll try and answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Of course, not entirely unexpected. We knew that there was a risk this would happen, as we noted at the time when the decision was made. Are there any questions? Judith?
Is there anything to learn from any other local authorities that have done this?
Quite possibly. I think at this point in time, I think it's really positive that DLUC are actually engaging with us directly. So I think we're probably past the point of liaising with other authorities that possibly would have come at the beginning of the process. But you know, the fact they want to meet to us, they proactively wrote to us and said, let's have a conversation about how we can help you basically address the points that we feel that you've slightly fallen behind on. I think is really positive. And as Judith says, you know, they're not against the introduction of this. It's just finding those more targeted areas.
It's really, I mean, do we know of other local authorities who've been successful, and those that were outright not successful? And if they were successful, was it a case of just having a smaller area? I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to find out much about it and we are meeting. That's true, but it just seems that we could perhaps know a little bit more about what's wrong with the whole of the city centre. They're going to tell you on Tuesday, but I just wondered if we had known of other local authorities who had been successful, and if they hadn't, why not?
Well, we don't at the moment know, but we certainly will ask that question of the representatives. But I mean, there have been an awful lot of local authorities in London, for example, that have introduced Article 4 directions covering the whole of their boroughs. So they're probably not, I'm not quite sure where they are left. With that, but they've already introduced the Article 4 directions. So, but we certainly, there's a number of questions we want to ask the representatives we're going to be meeting with next week, and there may be some that will be in this position as well that we can then contact.
When you say other boroughs that have introduced it, how have they done that then?
Well, they've done it before. The approach was taken, the change to national policy that talked about having a more targeted approach to the introduction of the smallest area possible should be identified, but this is prior to this being introduced.
So they were quick off the mark.
I think it's possibly as a result of the change in the NPPF that made the hoop a bit harder to jump through, if that makes any sense, as to why we've come up against this problem. Certainly in DLUC's letter, they kind of said, you've got substantial areas of retail that are being covered by this, and it's unnecessary because they're not office uses. So I think they want us to really look at those strategic offices we've got in the city centre and, proactively support those to stay in that office use to support the wider city centre. But it's less of a blanket approach and more kind of targeted at those specific employment and office-based sites.
Okay, are there any other questions? Adam, and then Denise.
Thanks. What are the specific strategic office areas we'd be particularly looking to protect under the more targeted approach?
Well, that's part of the piece of work that we wanted to do, kind of have the conversation with DLUC to say, well, how targeted is targeted? Are we looking at an individual building, or, for example, are we looking at potentially an area around the courts where you've got several buildings? Can we draw multiple areas? So that's part of the conversation to have next week. We're also going to re-engage Ramidus, who did the original survey for us, to kind of do some of that work and really map this out and kind of work with DLUC to hone it down. But that will all come out and then be referred back to SD panel for consideration.
Thanks, Alan. Denise?
Yes, thank you. Yes, how much office space in the city centre has been lost to housing, and how many dwelling numbers have been created as a result of conversion.
I'm not sure I can answer that specifically. We can come back to you with that, but certainly in a fairly recent monthly report, it was over 30% from 2008. Yeah, that's probably is higher than that now. Yeah, so that's yeah.
I think it was in the previous report that came in November, those kind of figures. The concern for us as well is not just the loss of the office space, but also the standard of the housing accommodation that's being achieved from this, because it's pretty poor in some cases.
Have you had any complaints from the people living in those new dwellings?
Not directly that I'm aware of, but they are predominantly kind of single aspect, very small bedroom sizes. I think nationally there have been some as small as kind of 12 square metres. I'm not saying there's any of those in Norwich, but it's definitely producing very poor accommodation. And our private sector housing team are aware of some kind of those kind of accommodations in the city which are substandard, not just because of the PD kind of right, etc., but because of other reasons as well. But yeah, it doesn't produce a good form of accommodation. It loses our office accommodation, which means the city centre thrives throughout the day. So it's we just need to find that balance of protecting and.
So the government must see it as a very short-term issue, because in the longer term we're going to have very poor housing and health problems.
Can you use my through the chair?
I think there has been a recognition through some changes to the General Permitted Development Order to tighten up what does and doesn't get prior approval kind of through this process, because they did recognise when they first brought it in, you were getting those really small dwellings coming forward, and they accepted it wasn't a good idea, but they still see to a certain point that this does actually enable quite quick conversions. So I think it's not coming off the General Permitted Development Order, which from my perspective is a shame, but it's part of their kind of build programme.
Well, it's getting private sector accommodation on the cheap, isn't it? And it's, as you say, it needs a short-term fix to actually what's a long-term structural issue, which is regrettable. And of course, what we were looking for, we weren't looking to block any conversion. What we were looking for was to take away the automatic right to convert office to residential, so that we could have some say in whether or not the plans were appropriate, and so that they'd have to go to planning committee. So it's not an unreasonable ask, I would say, and it's going to be interesting to see. Because I suspect what we're going to end up is a number of different areas in the city which haven't asked for direction, but smaller areas. Any other questions? Leslie?
I'm just wondering if there might be conversions that we don't know about, because, it may be that changes to business rates and presumably council tax would be our trigger to know that it's happened, even if they don't decide to go on the electoral register. But I can see it just happening kind of quietly. But are they under any legal obligation to tell us when they convert and when somebody moves into a corner office?
Well, obviously they have to do the prior approval process to get kind of a sort of permission, if that makes sense. So part of simplified planning is through the General Permitted Development Order, providing you meet certain conditions and limitations, you can then act under this permitted development right, but a conversion of offices to residential is subject to the prior approval process, so they have to submit something to us, but we can only take very limited issues into consideration, and the loss of office accommodation is not one of those things. I'm not aware of any that have kind of happened and gone under the radar that we don't know about, so we've had quite a lot of prior approval applications for these that we have effectively had to grant planning permission for. But it's not a full-blown planning permission, so we can't take everything into account, which is,
So when we get the weekly list of planning applications, I don't remember spotting any of those, so perhaps they're not included because it's not something we have any discretion over. But it would be interesting to know.
I will check that. I think they should have been on that list, just as a kind of information, but they're not something you could call in, I don't think.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, well, you've got your meeting with the department. next week. So we wish you well with that. We look forward to hearing what the criteria that they're going to set will be, because that's going to impact on which areas we're able to have a Article 4 direction over. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Judith and Sarah. So let's move on to the next item. This is item 7. This is the Norwich City Centre Shopping and Town Centre Floor Space Monitoring. This is an interim report, isn't it? So is this you again, Judith?
Yes, thank you. So this is to update you about the interim report that was done in March this year of the Norwich Town Centre Shopping and Town Centre Floor Space Monitor. The last retail monitor was carried out in July last year, and the survey was reported to you, I think it was in November of last year, and that survey showed that there had been a significant rise in retail vacancy rates since 2019, which is not at all surprising given the pandemic and lockdowns and so on, and that's referred to in paragraph 3 of the report. So it was agreed that due to this sort of level of unprecedented change, that SCPAM would have we're asking for a sort of more frequent monitor of city centre retail and town centre uses to be carried out. But due to this being fairly resource intensive, it's not proposed to carry it out every time that we do the full survey, but this is an interim survey that we've carried out, but we intend to do the full survey later on in the year and report that back to you as well, so we keep a closer eye on trends in the city. And we get a better understanding of how our centres have recovered from the pandemic and how we're coping with additional challenges as well, such as the cost of living crisis. So the findings of the March 22 report are attached at the appendix, but they're summarised in the report itself. I don't want to go through them all now in lots of detail, but you can obviously ask questions, but I'll just summarise some of the key findings. The survey shows that there's been an overall improvement in shop vacancy rates for shop units. So that's been a reduction of 14.1% in July last year to 13.8%. It's not a massive drop, but it's going in the right direction and it's positive. And it compares favourably to the national vacancy rate of 14.1% for the first quarter of this year. So, as it says in paragraph 4, there's been a reduction in vacancy rates in all parts of the city centre other than the large district centre. So looking at those other parts of the city centre, the primary retail area has dropped from 15.2% vacancy to 14.6%, so it's a decent drop. Secondary retail area has lower rates of vacancy, that's dropped from nearly 10% to just under 9%. The large district centre is the one that has risen actually, and that's the district centre around Anglia Square, St Augustine's and Madden Street, and also Riverside. That's risen from 10.9% vacancy in July last year to 12.7%. So that's just a flavour of the other parts of the city centre. But generally speaking, we feel that, in terms of vacant units, we're moving in a positive direction. In terms of vacant floor space, we count both units and floor space, but the rates of vacancy are higher. So there's 15% for available vacant floor space, and it's even higher, 15.2% where you include premises that are being refurbished. And this seems to be the result of several multiples closing in the city in the last couple of years with Debenhams, Topshop, Mothercare, and Toys R Us. So in terms of the units, that's a sort of a more positive picture. And we think that the reason for that is that the smaller shops, more independent shops in the lanes, for example, are generally performing well and are proving to be more resilient. So other things just to note, other trends to note, there's a continuing trend of a decrease in the amount of overall retail floor space in the city centre, because the city centre is continuing to diversify and policies now sort of promote more flexibility. But where we had to find retail frontages, for example, in the primary retail area, they're still performing well in terms of the percentage of floor space which is within a certain specified amount of retail floor space. So that's set out in the main report. Castle Quarter continues to see very high vacancy rates. So it's 15% of retail floor space, but overall 33% of units are vacant in Castle Quarter. And this is largely attributed to the closure of the vaccination centre. But it's important to note that investment is happening there, and the former food court is due to be refurbished as a new street food and sort of live music centre. Chantry Place has got very low vacancy rates by comparison, only 3.4% of floor space is vacant, and a number of new shops have recently opened there. Just to note that investment is taking place, as I mentioned, but with Royal Arcade, there's plans to change Jamie's, the restaurant unit, into a food emporium. So the city centre overall remains pretty vibrant. Footfall and spend is up on pre-pandemic levels, and as I said, there's investment happening there. And there's also, it's important to note, there's investment happening in the public realm as well through the Times Fund, in particular on Hay Hill. So all that will help to create an environment where people want to spend more time in the city centre and spend more money and do more sort of cultural activities there as well. So overall, the picture is generally positive considering the challenges of the past couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And I think the statistics from the centre of the cities are really, really impressive and encouraging. That's around footfall, where you look at the index, the base line pre-lockdown index was 100, and then you've got footfall 115, and also if you look at the weekday, weekend and nighttime index, the lockdown baseline is 100, the weekday index is 112, the weekend index is 142, and the nighttime is 76. But certainly, at all times of the day, we're doing a lot better than we did prior to lockdown, which is really, really good news, because, you know, especially with the rise of online shopping, there was a concern that there would be an inevitable decline, and I think it reinforces that the investment in public realm, the investment in more pedestrianisation, the creation of a cleaner city centre with fewer vehicles, and the diversification as well, more into an experience as a day out in the city, not just a shopping trip, but you can have a meal, you can watch a show, you can spend time here, and people wanting to linger. That's been successful, which is really, really good news. So in many ways, some of the earlier statistics haven't really changed very much, and they're really small, relatively small percentage changes, but certainly those footfall figures are excellent. And also, you know, we know that we've got a lot of inward investment coming, so we know we're going to have a hotel on Guildhall Hill, and we know that Debenhams is likely to become student accommodation. We know we've got Morrison's moving into the former Topshop Top Man. Or Laura Ashley is now occupied by a Tesco Express, which has moved, and then the former Jack Wills is a Costa. So, you know, lots of places have closed, but actually, and often to do with national factors, not local factors, but actually there's a good deal of inward investment, which is encouraging. But we're not there yet. There's still a lot of work to do. But I feel encouraged by this at this time. So that's none of my thoughts. Anyone else got any thoughts or questions or comments? Judith?
Yes, I'm glad you're encouraged, because when I come into the city I don't see that. I really don't. I think it's much quieter than it was before. Whether I come in at the wrong time, I don't know. But I mean, you know, I see the reference to city.
You've got to deal with the evidence.
Yeah, I'm just saying my personal evidence is that it's very quiet. It's very quiet. And while we are looking forward to these changes and these investments, we've got to take into account that St Stephen's has been devastated by the roadworks. No end of people where I live in Eton who get the bus in say they don't do it anymore. They can't do it. They can't walk from the Brunswick Road or the top of St Stephen's. They can't walk into the shops that they want. And that's not, and it's going to go on for, it's 9 months in total. We're talking about looking at all this investment and the Towns Fund. Do we ever sort of look at the impact that Roadworks has on our city centre? And I say, I think there's bad news to come because St Stephen's shops, people just haven't been able to get to
So,
through public transport, and they're the people that cannot walk the distance.
I mean, the first thing I'd say is that there's a difference between evidence and anecdotes, and so, you know, in terms of, you know, I respect that that's how you feel the city in the centre is. I was just talking to one of my colleagues before about how busy it is, and I'm sure they'll talk to them about actually how they don't like coming in because it's too busy. So, you know, there are other there are other perspectives on this. But just to be clear, I mean, yeah, we all are concerned for the businesses on St Stephen's. However, we don't have space in the city centre for a bus station of the size that a city of this size demands. So we do have to use not just a bus station, but we have to have buses stopping on St Stephen's and Castle Meadow. And what had happened on St Stephen's was that the buses were jamming it up. There were too many of them, and they were queuing behind one another, and they were emitting diesel emissions, so they're actually creating an air quality issue. And so the purpose of the roadworks is to put in place sawtooth paving, which will enable the
I do understand why it's being done. What I'm saying is it will have an impact.
Are you saying it shouldn't be done?
I don't think that the overall benefit is going to be there for public transport users.
Okay.
Because I think it will look absolutely brilliant. But I don't think it will improve the experience of somebody using public transport enough to make an impact, or somebody who's usually taking their car. Are they going to get out of their car and get on the bus just because St Stephen's looks better and should operate better? I don't know whether buses coming out of a herringbone pattern are actually going to improve public transport. They might lead to a few problems with people walking behind the buses and cyclists. But, you know,
well, again, you know,
my point was that while we're looking forward to this investment having a good impact on the city centre, we just got to take into account the 9 months that people couldn't use those shops in the way that they used to. And in my experience, have told me that because they can't get off a bus, go into a shop, do their shopping and get back on, they can't walk the distance. And they say that a 25 bus and a 10 bus is just hopeless for people in Eden, trying to get to those shops and people who are elderly and disabled. And 9 months is a long time through the very busy summer period, trying to get back to normal, and we're not even there yet. We're probably going to be autumn sometime. But that was just, you know, as a contrast to looking forward to all this development, there has also been some negative impact because of the roadworks.
yeah, I mean, in terms of the 9 months, you need to talk to the county council about the timescale clearly, because they're responsible for the implementation. But again, you know, sawtooth blunt, do they work? Well, we know that sawtooth pavements have been put in place in other cities, and they have worked, and there haven't been accidents. And again, you know, we look at the evidence before we make those decisions, because often, you know, what seems like common sense, actually, when you look at the evidence, it's there to the contrary. But yeah, you know, no gain without pain. I'm sorry to say. But there is going to be an improvement, in particular, in fewer traffic jams of buses and air quality in St Stephen's as a consequence. And again, you know, I don't think people are hanging around on polluted streets. So actually improving the air quality will be good for trade. But I accept what you say, that it's difficult in the meantime. So, yeah, interesting points. So I saw Kate, and then I saw Leslie. So we'll take Kate first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wanted to say it was me a couple of Saturdays ago. I came into the city and then regretted it. Although it's a lovely day and there's lots of people looking happy and busy, which was fantastic. It was too busy for my personal taste, so we need to confer, I think. The other thing that I was going to say was noting the street entertainment that's coming up over the summer with what's the trail we've got from break? Is it dinosaurs this year?
It's dragons again.
Dragons, isn't it?
I think it's dinosaurs again. Yeah.
Excellent. And also the head out, not in. When people are around and about them, they tend to spend more, and it's, as you say, more of a pleasurable experience and a cultural experience rather than just shopping. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, Lucy?
I'm going to build on your theme of being encouraged and try to encourage us to look at meanwhile uses of all those empty shops. I'm not sure how many of those we own or have control over, but there is a need for space in the city from lots of small groups that don't have much money. So what would they have to do to get permission to use those hubs? So I'm thinking things like eco hubs, repair cafes, changing places, food banks, startups, advice services, workshops, something I can't read there, hot desking, cycle parking, all those things would benefit from more space, and the city might be more vibrant if they were allowed to use it for a peppercorn rent for an afternoon a week, for any purpose whatever, would be more likely to bring you into the city than an empty shop front. So I'm wondering if any exploration has been done on that, or could be.
Good question. Yeah.
I don't think we've done any to date, but I have just made a note to kind of speak to the assets team about what units we own throughout the city. So I think the Laura Ashley unit, which we did own, is a good example. We obviously got approached about the hotel. We had the vacant Laura Ashley unit, and we were able to kind of accommodate Tesco Express in it, so retain Tesco in the city centre, but obviously enable development of that larger building. So I've made a note to speak to the property team, establish which units we own, and then we can potentially look at ways that we can simplify the process and get some of those meanwhile uses in if we can.
Brilliant.
Because you're right, Leslie, that having uses like that, even at a peppercorn rent, but it does have a knock-on effect in that it's another reason for people to come into the city, or something that makes it more convenient to people coming into the city. So that might well, if it's possible, that might well be a really good idea. Adam, and then Denise. Yeah, we'll find out. Adam and then Denise. So I saw Adam first. It was almost a photo finish.
Thanks, and the report is broadly positive comparative to other areas, and that's testament to the hard work of our town planners. An example of what Leslie is referring to would be our premises on St Giles Street that we're giving a peppercorn rent to New Routes at the moment for their shop, which is a really fantastic initiative. I was going to ask about, on a less positive note, about the cathedral retail part and whether there have been any more discussions about the future viability of that as a retail site in the city.
I need to go and ask one of my DM's officers. I think we've had some pre-application about kind of fulfilling its allocation, which is predominantly for housing-led development with some for student accommodation. So I think I'm aware that a lot of the units are looking to relocate out there. We've been approached confidentially by some of the retail units who are still there at alternative sites. So I think that's probably going to come forward for the housing development onto the application at some point in the future.
Thank you.
That would be very positive, I think. Okay, because you never really recovered from the loss of Toys R Us, has it? No, I think it goes back. So I've got Denise. Did you want to come in on that particular point, Lucy?
Not that particular one. I just wanted to add that there's a number of groups are looking for places where they can hold blended meetings, and not many venues are set up there yet. So if any of those empty buildings are able to offer that, it would be a real asset.
Okay.
I'll take that with the asset team. I think putting the infrastructure, for example, for hybrid meetings is really quite expensive.
Unless it's already there.
Unless it's already there, but we can ask those questions as well.
Denise, waiting patiently.
No, my experience of the city centre, especially around the market area, is that people have returned, and it feels very vibrant because there are lots of different sorts of things that people can do, not just shopping. I think my particular concern though is Castle Mall, in that it's never really fun to and you go in there, and it feels a very sad space. And unless there are a lot of people thronging through the public walkways, it just feels very dead. Even if the shops are filled, it just doesn't seem to work. And I think probably because it is just largely focused on retail in those retail areas, I'm interested in hearing about the music and the food stalls, but I'm not sure if it's going to bring sufficient people in to produce the sort of vibe that we have around the market area. Also interested to hear whether there's been any measurement of the impact of more dedicated student residences in the city centre. We've had a lot being built. And I don't have any sense. There are lots of students around. Maybe that I'm not seeing.
Where are they all?
Yeah.
They blend in very well.
Around and John Lewis, the All Saints Green there, and then obviously St Stephen Street, but obviously the transport works there causing problems. But yeah, I don't really get a sense that there are large numbers of young people in and around. It may be because I'm not there at the right time of day, and I might be there in the evenings or something like that.
Maybe you're in a different time zone to the students,
Yes.
as it were.
Castle Mall, I just wonder. I wonder about the future of Castle Mall, because I think even if you get retail shops filled, I still feel it's going to be quite a lot of dead space there.
I think on the latter point about students, I think the introduction of kind of Morrison's in the city centre and things like that, where there is the purpose-built student accommodation, they are around. Yeah. I suspect they're probably asleep for most of the day because they're out at night.
I was a bit more diplomatic than that.
That's how it was when I was a student. I mean, I kind of sense, a kind of younger population around the city centre, but I think there's no kind of direct impact that we've measured between the amount of purpose-built student accommodation and kind of footfall in retail. I think it would be quite difficult to kind of capture that information effectively. In terms of Castle Mall, I think the management company themselves are trying to kind of do a lot to get Castle Mall back on its feet, and that's the kind of intention of this new kind of food and music kind of section. I think, from my perspective, you're never going to recreate what I think is quite a unique and special vibe of the market inside a building like Castle Mall. It's just not the right environment, effectively. No. And obviously, in those kind of purpose-built retail environments, you do see a lot more of your kind of big national chains going in, as opposed to your smaller independents. And this very afternoon, I had a meeting with somebody down on the lanes, and they'd never been there before, and they were amazed how vibrant it was. People wandering around, sitting, having coffees. You don't get that same kind of sense of character when you're inside a purpose-built shopping mall, effectively. But I think the management company are very aware that they need to diversify and evolve in order to get that footfall back in. As for the longer term future, we'll just have to kind of wait and see, I think. But we do look at Castle Mall specifically. It's included in the primary retail area, but we can monitor that quite carefully. And for a number of years, I think it's been on decline. So.
Yeah, it has got some leisure facilities in there, like the bowling alley and so on. I like bowling, so I've been there. But and then the numbers of people, it's still very thinly populated, and I just wondered what its long-term future is really. What do you do with an indoor shopping centre of a very high quality like Castle? Because maybe you can't convert it easily to residential or whatever.
I mean, I suppose that's kind of even when they make any decision about the future of Castle Mall, that's when we'd be approached and we'd enter into those discussions. I think it's we will clearly kind of look at planning applications for those units where we have control within our development management policies and try and support them in their diversification. But I'm not aware that they're pulling the plug at this point in time, so I think they're very hopeful that this new kind of music and food venue will be the thing that kind of brings Castle Mall back to life.
Well, I certainly hope so. But, I mean, they are trying to diversify, as you say, Denise. I mean, there's a mixture of leisure and retail. And there's the bowling alley and there's the food court, which is going to be reinvented. You're going to have music, and there's the cinema as well, and there's restaurants as well. But they've got to get to a critical mass to create a destination that people will want to go to and use all those facilities, I guess. And I mean, maybe the food court reinvented will do that. But I mean, all the points you make are very valid, and I agree with you. That's the area of the city that I'm most concerned about in terms of the future viability. I saw Gurpreet, so hi there.
Yeah, so building on the Castle Mount point, and it probably falls out of your remit, but has there been a consultation on what the public want there in the future? Or
There hasn't at this point. I mean, as I say, we don't own the asset. It's privately owned, so it would be up to that private company to decide at what point they decide they don't want to do what they're currently doing with it. And at that point, I would hope that they would engage with the people of Norwich to say, we want to redevelop this site, and they'd certainly have to engage with us at that point as well. But to date, there haven't been any discussions, and I personally don't think we're at that point yet. I think there is a future for Castle Mount, hopefully, and they're really trying to kind of diversify and establish that. So.
Leslie, I saw you.
I hope they do very well with it. I'm a little bit concerned that, if you're looking for street food, you might look for it on the street. So what are they going to offer that would make people come off the street?
Music, I think.
I don't know the specifics of what's coming forward, but I'm sure they've done their market research.
You'd hope so. It just seems a very obvious point, and I hope somebody will make it sooner.
I guess,
if they haven't already.
Thinking aloud, up in that food court where you've got the skylight, if you like, you can see outside, it's very bright, you can see out to the castle and such like. I guess it's different to the rest of the shopping centre. It feels less like a shopping mall, and you've got some connection with the outside. So maybe.
You can have a roof garden. That would get me in.
Sorry?
You can have a roof garden. That would get me in.
Yeah. Or Norwich's own Eden project, maybe.
Absolutely.
But have music and food. I mean, there's all sorts of things you could do if you want to be creative. So it's up to them, though.
It might be aimed more at the young kids, like teenagers, who seem to like hanging around in
Shopping
malls,
centres.
but having a different form of, food for them that sounds quite trendy at the moment. So, but we don't really know yet, and I'm sure they've done their research. We hope anyway on that.
So, Adam.
Thanks, Mike. I'm sure everyone's bored of my anecdotes, but I was speaking to some friends from Ipswich the other night.
No, we like these Ipswich anecdotes.
Well, Ipswich High Street's dead, but they were actually saying that they came up to Norwich a couple of months ago for the leisure facilities in Castle Quarter and had a good time, and said that they're looking forward to coming up again and have to meet up. So, we've had negative news about Castle Mall for 20 years, so, I just thought I'd say something positive.
Great. Good, thank you.
Totally anecdotal.
We all love comparisons with Ipswich, don't we?
I thought I'd cheer everyone up.
Brilliant. If there are no other comments, we're noting this, aren't we? So thank you very much, and very clear, concise report, and again the appendices with all the data really helpful as well. But the next time we see one of these, it'll be a full-blown report, won't it?
Yes, and also it'll look at the rest of the city as well, not just the city centre.
Yeah. Okay, right, thank you everybody. And with that, we're done. So thank you. That was a nice, short, sweet and focused meeting.